Sigue en sintonía de nuestra programación.
Ahora empieza su programa, el show del Dr. Roy Aranda. Temas sobre los efectos que tiene la separación de los niños de sus padres, traumas que afrontan los indocumentados, violencia doméstica, el porqué de la violencia en las escuelas. Llámanos en vivo al 1-888-900-2811, extensión 6, y haz tus preguntas al aire. ¡Comenzamos!
Los televidentes de la Tribuna TV. Today is March 26, hoy es el día marzo 26. Estamos hoy con un programa nuevo. We have a new program today. I have to share that it's like an impossibility even in this program not to touch base on the coronavirus or the COVID-19. So we will touch upon it and you'll understand why. Vamos a tocar el tema lamentablemente sobre el coronavirus porque es inescapable hoy día de no hablar sobre el tema. What we have today is a show that it's called, in English, Children Without Voices, the Psychological and Legal Effects of a Failed Child Welfare System, en español, Niños sin Voz, los efectos psicológicos y legales de un sistema fallido de bienestar infantil. And I do have a previous guest, and I do want to say that we both of us and Oscar, we're very mindful about the requirements and the recommendations to maintain proper social distancing and washing the hands and sanitizing surfaces. And we have been doing that here in the studio where I am. And as you can see, Don Jorge, George, Mr. Rosario, I'm going to call you George, and we're keeping a healthy distance here, and as is Oscar. Say hello, Oscar.
Hi.
So I think it's important to point out that those of us who hold any sort of a leadership kind of a role, be it the politicians that you see on TV, those that you come in contact with, attorneys, doctors, and so forth, we need to set an example and serve as a model, and that's why we are very conscious about doing that here. We do take the coronavirus epidemic, it's a pandemic, seriously. We certainly want to do the best that we can to flatten the curve and to come out of this. You know, I'm a type of person, I've said it before, I'm more of a half glass full kind of person. I see the sunshine, I see bright horizons, I tend to see silver linings, and I know that there will come a time that this will be over, and I'm hoping that we will grow and learn from the experience and be stronger in the future. But out of respect to the requirements and the requests to really do that which we can do to contribute to helping eradicate or at least slow down the coronavirus. We are heeding that. I will also share with you that I am not seeing any of my patients in any of my offices. So I'm also doing whatever it is that I have to do from home. I did want to keep this show going. So this is really one of the very few limited outings that I intend to continue with. So without further ado, let me just introduce you briefly to Jorge Rosario, and then we'll get into my inspiration for doing the show, and we have several slides that we hope will be educational and informative for you. So also the show is being recorded live on YouTube. It'll be available immediately after the show, and by tomorrow it's available on Tribuna TV's website, on Facebook, YouTube, Vimeo, and probably other social media platforms. You'll be able to access it. I also would like to share, quiero también avisarles, aconsejarles, dejarles saber, next week on April 2nd, Abril 2, we are going to do a first ever show, at least for me, first time for me, that I and a psychologist, Dr. Evelyn Rappaport, who will be a guest on Skype, we are going to be responding to questions asked by viewers about how to cope with the psychological effects of the coronavirus. Vamos a hablar sobre o contestar preguntas que se han hecho los televidentes sobre cómo bregar con los efectos psicológicos del coronavirus. Por ejemplo, gente que se sienten deprimidas, people who feel depressed, anxious, they don't know what to do with their children are depressed, their families are somehow severely affected by it, they're financially strapped, and they're feeling more and more anxious, angry, and depressed as time goes by. So we will do that next week, Thursday, April 2nd, from 9 to 10. My guest then will be Dr. Evelyn Rappaport. I also would like to give a shout out to a good friend of mine who serves as a peer mentor when I ask him questions, and he helps me with the show from the distance, Dr. Peter Canaris. Thank you, Peter. And also Dr. Ronald Sherman as well. So thank you, both of you, for your invaluable help for these past almost 2 years. So my guest is attorney Jorge Rosario, who's eminently qualified to talk on this subject, which pertains to the broken child welfare system. He has an extensive background at Suffolk County Legal Aid Society Children's Law Bureau, representing children, where he served as bureau chief of the department for many, many years. So he provided representation to children who've been victims of abuse or neglect, children in custody visitation cases, guardianship matters, and children accused of being persons in need of supervision or juvenile delinquency. In addition, Jorge was an attorney in the United States Army Reserves for 14 years in the JAG Corps, and he served for a total of 22 years. You sure look a lot younger than that. So, he's a retired major. I'm very impressed. He's also commander of the Martina A. Kessler VFW, that's Veterans of Foreign Wars, Post 2912, which actually is in my neighborhood. Jorge and I, we keep a respectful two-house distance residential from, so I know him from there. So thank you so much, Jorge. Was there something that I left out that you wanted just to chime in?
No, I just wanted to say thank you, and how important this topic is, even though we're going through a pandemic, that it's that important that we felt that we needed to.
Well, I mean, life goes on. It has not come to a stop, and people need to realize that. They need to understand that. You still have kids to worry about. You still have your families to worry about. You still have your car to worry about, your pets to worry about, your friends to worry about, family members to worry about. You still have to continue and have that thinking of, where do I go? What do I need to do today? What do I need to do tomorrow? What do I need to do next week? And not just sit there and catastrophize, which is what I think the public is doing. That prompted me to want to have this call-in show, where I'll be going over viewers' responses. Viewers are encouraged, by the way, to submit questions to Facebook, because I'm going to be taking a select number of questions, posting them and answering them. Obviously, in a little bit over an hour, there's a limit to how many questions we can take. And I do want to have a fair number of questions that are representative to a number of people, so everybody's able at least to get something out of one, if not more, of the questions. We are going to be going over some of the statistics of child abuse and neglect, some definitions, the effects of child abuse and neglect to the children and to the parents as well. And then I did tell you that we're going to cover an aspect of what role COVID-19 has to do with children. And we're going to talk a little bit about that as well. And Jorge, as an attorney, he's going to take it away afterwards with criticisms, concerns, and recommendations for how to improve the child welfare system. We're going to end the show, as always, with some resources for the viewers out there who may wish to gain further information and or contact the the phone numbers and the references. So I did want to share with you, puedes poner el primer slide, por favor, Oscar, what my inspiration for the show is. You know, there's always something that motivates me to do a particular show. Slide 1. So historically, I have always been touched when I hear about child abuse and neglect cases, and have seen through my work on many occasions the consequences and impact to children in failed marriages and in situations in which children were affected physically and emotionally. I mean, I've been practicing for over 30 years, about 35 or so years, so I've seen a lot of this. The scars run deep. They have long-lasting effects. When attorney Jorge Rosario approached me to talk about inherent problems in the child welfare system, and this is a quote. I took what you said. It's a quote. The failure and fear some of us had for over a year, having appeared briefly on News 12 due to testifying before the Suffolk County legislators and having been quoted in Newsday, I jumped at the opportunity and I said, you bet, which is what brings him here. I know Jorge has been pushing for reforms to make a better child welfare system. It is with this aspiration that I myself share, and I choose to be, and I know you have been, a voice for the children and parents who suffer. It is for them that I dedicate the show. So I wanted to give you some general concepts now. Jorge, please feel free to chime in on any occasion. The slides that are more legal are going to come a little bit after some of these general concepts. El primer es el segundo slide, por favor, Oscar. Some general concepts. I wanted to share with you the awesome statistics. This is what we're looking at annually. Nearly 700,000 children are abused in the United States. An estimated 1,670 children died from abuse and neglect in 2015. The most common form of maltreatment is neglect, and about 4 or 5 abusers are the parents of the victims. I'm going to guess that these statistics probably misrepresent, underrepresent, because you have, undoubtedly a lot of people who are not reporting, who are afraid and intimidated. So I'm sure that this is really a little bit closer to the tip of an iceberg, and there's probably a lot more underneath that tip. So some basic definitions: abuse. A parent or person legally responsible for the child inflicts serious physical injury or creates substantial risk of serious physical injury or commits a sexual offense against a child or allows someone else to inflict harm on a child. Neglect. A child's physical, mental, or emotional condition has been impaired or placed in imminent danger or impairment by the failure of the parent, caregiver, the person legally responsible to exercise a minimum degree of care. La próxima página. On slide 3, we're looking at some of the indicators. I do want to also just recommend to the viewers, please feel free. I make these slides hopefully that they can be useful to you. Feel free to take photographs of the slides. Once the show is out, feel free to take screenshots of whatever slide you are interested in. They are yours, yours to use. Some indicators of abuse here are just some basic general kinds of indicators. I don't pretend that this covers the entire full spectrum. There's enough material to talk about in dealing with the broken child welfare system that would cover seminars, workshops, and coursework. So really, in an hour's time, what I can do is give you a bit of an overview and hope that you walk away with something. And if you're interested in knowing more, that you'll take advantage of the resources and or contact Jorge himself, or as I've always offered, contact me as well. Serious injuries. Frequently appearing injuries. You see a kid like bruised over and over and over again. How did you get that? There's only so many times a person can have an accidental fall. Destructive, aggressive, disruptive behavioral acting out on the child. Passive, withdrawn, emotionless, very, very placid, very lackadaisical, in a corner, just completely like in his or her own world. Fear of going home. Fear of the parents, indicators of sexual abuse, symptoms of sexually transmitted diseases, injury to a genital area, difficulty or pain sitting or walking, sexually suggestive, inappropriate, promiscuous behavior, certainly age inappropriate, when you see age inappropriate. Here, age inappropriate knowledge, below sexual victimization of other children, and indicators, lastly, of neglect, malnourishment, listlessness, fatigue, stealing or begging for food, lack of personal care hygiene, untreated medical needs or dental care, frequent absences from school or lateness, child is left unattended or without supervision. I know that one of the cases that you'll say a few words about is that child, the 8-year-old from Long Island, Thomas Valvin. Certainly there were indicators of neglect, indicators of abuse as well.
Yes.
So we'll talk about that a little bit. Puede sacar el slide. Anything that you wanted to add to this? I wanted to get into the effects on the children, parents, COVID, and then all the legal aspects.
Yeah. In terms of some of the indicators that were touched upon, some of them are very obvious, right? I mean, they're obvious, but yet they're not, because just like one of the things you mentioned was a child continues to get a similar injury, right? That would seem obvious, but let's say somebody doesn't see the child all that often to make that report, right? And this is why we're a little concerned about with the pandemic that's going on, because the mandated reporters are not seeing the children every day at the school, the teachers, social workers, and medical folks. More medicine now, right, is being practiced by video, right? So that observation by a professional of the child and asking questions and looking at the response can be missed, right? So these are the things that are indicators that we have to keep mindful of, that sometimes can be missed even with something seeming so glaring.
We'll take a much closer look at COVID-19. Also, I think that it's important to state that you're looking for changes in behavior.
Yes.
When you have like a happy-go-lucky child, and then like you're starting to see changes in behavior, and somehow you learn that there was a disruption in the child's family life, that change in the behavior could well be consequential to the disruption in the child's family.
Yes.
Typically it doesn't mean that it has to be, abuse and neglect. You have a child may lose a parent to a traumatic accident or cancer or some sort of an illness, and the child will be reacting to that, expect to see behavioral changes. Yeah. But the point is, if you see these behavioral changes, you have to in some way try to react and try to interact with the child.
We even in dealing with kids that have been accused of crimes, when delving into it, utilizing the attorneys, utilizing social workers and therapists and psychiatrists, we've been able to sometimes find that their criminal behavior, even if it's stealing, it's not directly related to not eating, but it's a way of acting out, right? Fighting in school.
Right. Notice me.
Yeah.
I need help. What else do I have to do?
And I always like to show the Breakfast Club, right, where the one young man with the leather jacket acted out because he revealed to the other kids that he was abused. He was being abused by his father, physical abuse. So he was playing the role of a tough guy.
Yeah,
because that's what he knew.
He becomes a macho guy.
Yes.
Let's look at some of the effects on children. Oscar, por favor, el 4. We're going to look at effects on children, and of course, we have effects on parents as well. For instance, anger, separation anxiety. They're afraid of leaving the side of the parent. They develop fears or phobias, diminished self-confidence, low self-esteem. They may have thoughts that they just can't succeed or that they're no good. They fail at no matter what they do. Feelings of helplessness. No matter what I do, I can't accomplish something. Hopelessness, it's just not going to get better. Loss of trust, like a parent who repeatedly promises something, promises to visit, promises to make a phone call, and fails. doesn't do it. So that at that point, you're starting to develop a loss of trust. Sleep disorders, appetite disorders, some of these changes are very important to keep an eye on. Problems at school, use of substances, relationship problems with other children, with parents, with friends, and with other relatives. You know, you may see a distancing or acting out or anger or just not wanting to be around them. Guilt feelings, maybe I did something to cause this, or it was my fault. I drove Daddy away. They told me that if I didn't stop asking for a present, that this was going to happen. Self-destructive thoughts and acts, where they do engage in some self-injurious kind of behavior or thoughts. That's by the way, very significant, very important. If you either see it or hear it in your child, you can't ignore it and just pretend you didn't hear it and hope it goes away. You have to in some way interact, ask, look, examine, explore, keep an eye on the kid, find out what's going on. Make sure that you get contact and communication from other caretakers or at the school. Find out what's going on. You cannot ignore or sit on it. Behavioral problems, destructive acts, maybe truancies, breaking things, temper tantrums, throwing things. Effects of relocation. Where if there's a separation or a divorce, where there were two homes, where there was one home, now there's two. What happens if one wants to go to a different state? Or even if it's in the same state, like here, Long Island and Queens, it's not a tremendous distance, but there's some distance involved in that. So the effects of relocation, new friends, new school, new people, this has an effect. Relationships with separated siblings. If you've had one sibling go with one parent, another sibling stays with another parent, those siblings are going to have reactions to one another. Mommy preferred me, daddy preferred you, things like that, and separation from other family members, and also the relationships as a result of separation and distances over time begin to deteriorate. Yes. You have less contact, not only face to face, but telephonic, social media. The relationship starts deteriorating. Let's look at the effects on the parents. Eso el 5. Parents who are dealing with children who either have problems or where there's manifestations of child abuse or neglect, or where there are relationship problems leading possibly to separations and or divorce. The affected parent, the one who is not with the child, is going to miss the child. There may be excessive worrying while the difficulty, the impairment in the relationship's going on. Afterwards, like you're worrying, how is she doing? How is little Joe doing in school? This excessive worrying. As in the children's sleep, appetite disturbances, there's an impact on your daily life. It may affect your ability to concentrate at work, your focus at work. You may start missing or skipping work or showing up late to work. Your work production, your quality of your work decreases. Mm-hmm. Also in other aspects of social functioning, there could be, in fact, an impact. Not having much of a say in the child's life. I know that modernly this notion of joint custody it seems to be the trend, but there's always usually one parent that's more the custodial parent, more in charge. The other parent seems to have less say and less authority, less of an impact in that child's life. And obviously where distances are involved, it's greater. Financial repercussions. Going from one household to do, there are going to be loss, monetary difficulties ensuing from going from one house to two residences. Barriers from the distance, resentment of family members and others. The child may be resentful to other family members. The separated parent may have resent feelings towards other family members on the other side. Again, you see decrease in the frequency of contact that I've mentioned, and decrease in quality of life. So, as promised, now we're going to get into the impact of COVID-19. Where, again, I'd like you to share that because you're aware of the recession.
Yes.
So let's look at how is it that COVID-19 may play a role in child abuse or neglect. And now slide 6. So many might recall the recession of 2007 through 2009. Yes. There were a lot of studies then, and not only then, but on other occasions where there are significant periods of time where there are changes in financial, the economy and or kids being out of school, or where there's changes in the life of children over a period of time that indicate there's a potential for an increased risk in child abuse and neglect. And in fact, there was this study here that I put down February 3rd, 2015, Kids 5 years after the recession, Smart Policies, Better Lives, and I just have a brief one paragraph from there. A new analysis shows that 5 years after its technical end, the recession of the mid-2000s continues to impact America's children in 4 key areas: health, hunger, housing, and abuse and neglect. A lot of this has much to do with financial repercussions and financial issues, but I did want you to see the abuse and neglect that's very much in there. But, and this is why Jorge and I, we spent a bit of time talking about it, and why I want you to share whatever your thoughts are. The recession, it did not have these following pieces. We didn't have this mandatory stay-at-home regulations now in many states. Stay at home. You cannot go out. You must stay at home. It's not absolute. I mean, people can go to the car or whatever, but it's basically a stay-at-home mandate. We did not have this in the recession. We did not have the schools closing a few weeks ago, where you have children now, they can't graduate, they're not able to attend their proms, they're not able to walk down the aisle, or, well, not the aisle, but the stage and get their diploma. Even little kiddies graduate, or kindergartners, they like to graduate, hold up a little diploma, have little parties. That's gone. So schools were closed. Basically, we have no non-emergency doctor visits. I know that I personally have gotten phone calls and messages from doctors where I have appointments, being told if it's not an emergency, cancel it.
Yes.
So again, if you don't have an emergency need with your child, you're not going to go to the doctor. Consider additional added stressors. You have far more people now who are unemployed and applying for unemployment. I believe it was 3.25 million, if memory serves me, that applied this past week for unemployment. And that's approximately close to 6 times the previous ever record in the United States.
I understand it was even crashing the systems.
Right.
When people were applying, they were having difficulties applying.
Anxiety is up the roof. This is something that we talked about last week, and that's because of the anxiety being up the roof that I'm doing the show on next week. We don't have an opportunity for contact, social interactions. Social interactions through the phone, through text, Skype, through social media, but not everybody has this. Yes. So not everybody has these opportunities, and it's still not the same thing as having face-to-face get-togethers. How do you play a group game on the floor that you used to play before, getting on the floor and spreading out and putting the pieces on the floor? You can't do that. How do you do that virtually?
Yeah.
You can't do that virtually. Visits to family members and friends and others are not taking place, and if they are at all, they are significantly reduced. More people are sick This is adding to the stress level. The incessant news feed. It's like we have not only a coronavirus pandemic, we have a news feed pandemic. Let's face it.
Yes.
The news is a news blitz that's become a pandemic in and of itself. It's negative, 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 negative. Now, I'm not saying that it's not real,
but it's very repetitive.
And we don't need to be informed. We do, but there has to be a judicious amount of how much viewing time you need to be accurately informed. And beyond that, what it is that you need to do to go on with your life. Otherwise, it becomes toxic and it becomes addictive, and it's all you're doing is looking at it and looking at it and looking at it, and it seems to just instill greater sense of hopelessness. Adults' reliance on unhealthy behaviors to cope, and this can have an effect on children. So adults who are relying more on trying to sedate themselves with alcohol,
right.
or even if it's prescribed drugs, illegal drugs, some of the other kinds of behaviors, just deciding I'm not going to deal with this, I'm going out no matter what, let me go to the beach anyway. Some of the things that you were seeing in Florida with people on the beaches, that's certainly maladaptive behavioral responses to this. And this could affect the children. Anything you'd like to add that? Because I know that you were involved with the recession, the effects of it, and you've seen the statistics.
Absolutely. 2007, 2008, around that time period, there was a tremendous increase in reported neglects and abuse cases. And as you demonstrated with some of the numbers 5 years later, we still saw the effects of that. And that's because the change in the economy, we are in a more of a service economy, right? So more of the jobs that were created since 2008 are in lower paying jobs, right? So what effect does that have on those families? Well, they continue to hurt. They continue to have the issues of not having enough, whether it's medical care or food. So one of the things that we see now is because the kids are not in school, they're
not in church, they're not in school, they're not in synagogue, they're not in temples.
Well, one thing the school did, because of the federal programs providing them the food, they were getting nourishment at school, right? So now you have a parent that was struggling already with a child to feed the child, so they go to school. They would have all schools, they have an early morning program. You go in extra early, you can sit down and have a meal. Well, all the studies show that helps kids learn. So with these children at home, the consequence is going to be that the families may not be able to feed them.
Right. And they're full-time caretakers now. Something that was shared with teachers and with other individuals.
Absolutely.
And like you said, the food was part of the program. It was free. So they were getting this free, nutritious food, and now all of a sudden the parent has to sit there worrying about it.
Concerns us, because that's going to lend itself to that higher stress levels. You got a week, you could deal with a week, but now you're dealing with 2 weeks. We're hearing that we may have to exercise this social distancing for a month, for an entire month. Now you're not sure where your paycheck's coming from. You're not sure if the family's going to eat. These are all stressors that can lead to neglect or abuse.
Well, the financial aid package is not even yet.
That won't be ready for a little bit of time,
Still.
and that again is going to be dependent upon your taxes.
Right.
That's what.
And it's called financial aid. It's not called that. This is like a freebie that we're replacing everything that you've lost.
No,
that's not
no, it doesn't replace.
It's just to maybe
lost.
try to stay afloat a little bit more.
But, so these are greater concerns, and and we're here to talk about the broken child welfare system. So how does that all play in together? Well, I say that especially in Suffolk County, we were having an issue monitoring families and children and keeping people safe. well, what about now?
Yeah, and that was before this.
That was before this. Now you have this extra layer, and the information I'm receiving from the field as well is that a lot of CPS workers are sick themselves, or can't come in, or have the same concerns that we all have. So now you have less of those that are supposed to.
They won't do face-to-face contact. And when you have children in foster placement, and I know that one of the big criticisms that the foster care system has had is the caseloads.
Yes.
So if you have somebody who's maybe, just as a hypothetical, 100 caseloads, 100 cases to see in a small window of time, and wasn't really making them or missing them or skipping some or just making abbreviated calls. You're not going to have any calls now, or it might be telephonic. I'm not even sure how I haven't followed it, so if you have, please share that. But I'm sort of guessing it's going to have to be done through video conferencing, and or, since I'm guessing that most of these people don't have that facility, through telephone contact.
Yeah.
How's little Brian doing? Oh, he's fine. He's fine. He's playing right now.
Yeah.
Can I talk to him while he's in the bathroom right now?
Yeah, and we had we were saying that the problems we had problems that existed prior to this epidemic. So, and even in trying to address that, you mentioned some of the caseload numbers, and there's been some play too with some of these numbers. Back in 2018, when Congress passed the Family First Act, the act was pushed by the Democrats in order to lessen the amount of children that were taken out of minority homes. It was a disparate number, right? There was a concern on all sides that also the amount of money that was being used for foster care system. So they de-incentivized the use of foster care system through that legislation. So slowly you see in the numbers this trickling effect of the numbers being reduced in terms of reported cases, right? And if you don't report a case, then a kid doesn't go into the foster care system. So if something's unfounded, it doesn't get brought in, right, into these other numbers or into the foster care system itself. So some of the municipalities and localities, what they've been doing is diverting people to other areas. You'll see in many courts custody petitions going up while neglect petitions go down.
There's like an artificial lowering.
It's a little of both. It's being created and driven, yes, by the policymakers, by Child Protective Services and others who are trying to stay within a budget.
You were nice enough to give me a whole bunch of references, so let's look them through, and I'm going to ask you to go over it again. I encourage the viewers who are interested, take photographs. I'm not going to read through all of this. There's a lot of material here. It's not overly technical, but it is somewhat burdensome. So I'm going to ask Jorge just really to summarize and abbreviate it. Again, you can take photos or you can take screenshots. But this is really your domain, so thank you for this information. Let's start with slide 7. It started for you in Suffolk CPS. So why don't you tell us what we're looking at here?
Well, one of the things that CPS in 2018, they presented the annual report to the county executive, Steve Ballone. So in that report, they were discussing, and you see the numbers in the chart, that decrease from 2017 to 2018 in terms of a decrease of 942 reports, and which to them they felt this was a good number.
Slide 8, I think that comes out more. The numbers are more on slide 8. This, I think, is what you were talking about.
Yes. And so these numbers were very good for CPS in terms of for their funding, because they would get less money if more kids were in foster care, right?
Yeah. Tell the viewer what a COI is.
The COI, it's when a court orders a report or orders an investigation.
So it's a court-ordered investigation.
They call it in New York, in accordance with the Family Court Act, Section 1034. The Family Court has authority to order an investigation of a family. And they order CPS to conduct this investigation, and they have it in accordance to the laws.
And CPS clearly is Child Protective Services. I think that's fairly known.
Yeah. So the courts many times, when cases come in custody or in any other way, are presented to the court, and the court, either through its own investigation or attorneys like myself who represent children, you get to talk to the family or the children or other folks that are involved in their lives, and you find out that there's something going on. We make a request of the judiciary to order such an investigation. And so they are mandated, CPS, Child Protective Service, to conduct an investigation. So as you can see from the numbers, there were 367 court-ordered investigations in 2018. So what that says is that in 367 cases that were before the court was so concerned that they ordered CPS to investigate. Now, what's been concerning to many of us in the field is that CPS has investigated serious allegations. They note in their reports that the serious allegations they believe exist or are factual, but yet the report is unfounded. It defies logic, right? It defies logic that if you go and speak to a child and they say, yes, this happened to me and it was caused by a parent, but yet CPS thinks it's unfounded. It's not logical, right? So more and more of these reports we were seeing, and even in talking to some of the judges and court attorney referees in the county, they said, Jorge, we have concerns. Maybe there's something we can do? So at that point, I started writing to CPS. I had meetings with their top folks. Things seemed to be going well, but then it fell apart. They started ignoring our pleas for change, better communication, and many of us feared what could happen, which was what happened to the young boy Thomas Valva. Because, in that case, some want you to believe that, nobody knew what to do because it was the mother or the father. They weren't sure who was telling the truth. We're both abusing the child. We're both, scaring the children. But what they didn't do was, CPS failed to do, was offer the third alternative or fourth alternative, which is foster care. The Child Protective Services could have suggested to the court, simply said, Your Honor, I think there's a situation here we're not sure about. We need an emergency removal, where they would remove the child for a certain amount of days or just a week and allow them time to investigate, but also allow that child to speak to professionals, not in the presence of the family.
Would kinship placement be the first thing that would be looked at?
That was one of the alternatives that I had was suggesting as well. That's why I said there's a third and fourth, right? Okay. The last thing you want to try to do is foster care. But the point is that it exists for a reason. But if you look at this case and study it in terms of the legal back and forth, is that many people are claiming, there was one of two choices. Either the mom or their dad. Well, not necessarily, right? There were other family members. These folks were from Long Island. They had other family here. So they could have investigated and looked in those families, but also because there were reports that the father had video cameras everywhere. That's why the police were able to find their own recordings to make the arrest and find out that the tragedy was actually the doing of the father. So that's why I say sometimes you have to remove the child, because many people in their homes have video cameras. So how is a child going to tell you honestly what's going on with that?
To what extent is it's still happening that the parents, say, who is more financially secure, more connected, has a greater likelihood of being the one who's not going to be investigated and more likely to come out of it the way he or she prefers?
I think it's very likely. It continues to occur, but it's also it's not to place blame. There's a human factor to this, right? When somebody goes into a home and the home, it looks good, everything looks good, but that's why, as professionals, we have to know and discern. Well, we can't just go by those appearances. We have to properly investigate. Part of that investigation is having a good and in-depth conversation with the child. Children will reveal so much. And sometimes, as you know, doctor, what they don't say as well is important, right? And you have to be able to have that conversation. But in this case, the school knew. They reported it. They wrote about it.
I read somewhere 33 calls were made on somewhere in that to that extent.
Not just phone calls. They wrote letters of concern. So this is why, this is why it's a false narrative, what's being put out there, that there was only two choices. There weren't only two choices. This is the failure. This is where I say the system's broken. This is just one case.
So you're saying that
this is systematic.
At least temporarily, a judge can order let me put this child away for 1 week while we're doing the court-ordered investigation,
right? With
or
family,
2 weeks or whatever.
With family, with a grandparent.
Let me err on the side of caution, and what's in the best interest. Ultimately, it's the best interest of the child, not the best interest of the parent.
Correct.
So it's in the best interest of the child not to be abused.
But right now we're seeing a systematic problem, and one of them stems from the 2018 legislation.
This is what you're talking about, the Family First Act?
Yes.
What became of that? Is that still...
It's still the law, so it's...
Is it still affecting the children of the more of the minority or less financially?
Well, the effect that it has is that it decentivizes the use of foster care. Now, I'm an advocate of foster care, probably a last resort. I mean, don't get me wrong. All the studies show...
Is our next show going to be the broken foster care system?
Well, in many cases, there are fantastic foster care homes. But that's really the last resort. But the whole point is that it exists for the safety of the children. It's there for a reason. But this legislation takes away that funding. It takes away that funding. So if you're an agency head and you have been allocated less monies for this type of system, or you can save that and keep a child with somebody, a parent, like in the Valva case where he seems to be good, even though there are all these complaints. He's a police officer, he has a nice home, but they're dismissing every other indication that when you started the show, you spoke about.
This was also a special needs child. I think that he was on the
autism spectrum. Yes, and I've had many clients.
Possibly the brother too, I think.
Yeah, I've had many clients on the autism spectrum, and the spectrum is it's a big spectrum. But as long as the child can communicate, even a child who has autism will tell you where they're comfortable being and where they're not, right?
Yeah.
They can point, they can tell you, I want to be with mom or I want to be with dad. They can do that, many of them, right? And again, this system has its problems, and if it's not fixed, right now we can continue to see more cases like that. Now, this is a tragic case, but, if the child didn't die, we wouldn't have known about it. Right? We wouldn't have known that this was going on because the father would have gotten away with it. We know,
despite all of the complaints.
despite all the complaints.
And that an attorney was relieved of her duties, I think, even under those circumstances.
But all the indicators were there. Every indication that you started to show with was present in this case. And again, but how did we miss it? Well, we missed it because...
So how did we miss it?
Well, we missed it because we failed to, one, offer the alternatives, right? Because we're scared of the alternatives. Well, what's the alternative? Foster care is an alternative. Going with another, going with the kinship, going with kin, going with a friend, going with a neighbor, anything, right? These choices are all available. The kinship laws were actually changed that CPS is supposed to assist children even going into homes that are not family but still making them kin. That was expanded. So these alternatives weren't used. The tools were there. But, and I have to say this, there's a lot of very good child protective workers. I've met many, many excellent ones. But the other problem is there's no accountability.
I remember from many, many, many years ago, and I guess to the credit of Bronx County, that I was involved in some cases where the parent was being stripped of parental rights. And I was asked to evaluate the parent. There were some occasions that I thought were unfair because the parent really meant well and was just limited, intellectually limited, and with proper supports, I thought probably could have, continued to have been an adequate, a good parent. Wasn't abusing drugs or alcohol or really abusing the child or beating the child or anything. It was like just because of limited IQ, limited intelligence, and language and culture barrier. And I didn't think that they went far enough with that. I'm not sure how much you're seeing that.
Well, I'm glad you talked about that a little bit because this is something that I'm sure you would agree. CPS could have also pushed for a forensic evaluation. Now, apparently in the case, there was a suggestion that there should be one, but my understanding is that the mother didn't want the forensic, right? But CPS could have pushed it, and then the judge would have ordered that forensic. And in a case like this, the forensic would have done a lot.
Would have been far more detailed.
Absolutely. They would have been able to, a psychiatrist would have easily been able to pinpoint the father's issues, the father's need to control situations. And many abusers have that element to them, right? They need to control the situation. So with Thomas Valva, the child, he couldn't control the child because the child, one, the age of the child, two, because the child was autistic. So he wanted the child to do certain things, the child wouldn't do it, so he would punish the child.
Yeah, you tend to see that every now and then with the controlling person. Like, I can't, if you don't do it, I'm going to leave. I can't deal with you unless you do what I need you to do.
Right.
And they're not, they don't entertain realistic expectations of the child.
There's no gray in their thought process. But this is something that a forensic would have brought out. Yeah. And the forensic may have suggested, hey, early on, maybe the children shouldn't be with dad.
Oscar, point on slide 9. There's just I think 2 more slides, and then we'll get into the recommendations. I want to put slide 9 and slide 10. You probably covered a lot of this,
yes,
but I wanted to have it available for the viewers. If they want to take a photo of it, or it's on the screen for the possibility of taking a screenshot. Yeah. Is there anything from 9 that you didn't cover?
Yeah, actually, there's a couple of things. In terms of the fewer cases, what we're finding is that when workers are going into the home, and we find this a lot with parents that are addicted to opioids. So CPS becomes involved because somebody makes a report, something's going on. They investigate. They realize that somebody's struggling with the addiction, and then they'll find a grandparent and say, hey, why don't you go file for custody, and then the child will be okay. Now, that seems to make sense, but there's a missing component, is that there's no oversight of the parent to make sure they're getting treatment. So now it becomes incumbent upon the grandparent to monitor their child who has an addiction, a serious addiction, and to monitor a grandchild. How do you do that? And especially the grandparent doesn't know that they would probably have a right to stop a parent from parenting because they're the custodial parent. So this is a way where they did two things by doing this. CPS doesn't have to have oversight, and if they find anything bad, child doesn't go into foster care system. So you see the continuing thread, which is preventing kids into the foster care system. And again,
It becomes like a vortex.
yeah. So, and again, I'm not an advocate for the foster care system, but I'm an advocate for child safety.
Which is, obviously that's what we're talking about.
Yes.
Slide 10, por favor, Oscar. Let me know from slide 10, again, viewers, feel free to take a photo or a screenshot. Anything on slide 10, and then, give me 5 minutes of your recommendations, and then we'll wrap up with the resources. So anything from this slide 10.
I think we've spoken a bit about what's going on with the numbers and why it appears as such. But that's why it makes it interesting that CPS actually used this as an accolade for them, that they lowered, that these reports went down. But there's no explanation exactly how they went down, right? I mean, that's something that's kind of missing, I think, in the data. When you're doing when you're extracting information from data, you need to kind of find out why that is.
All right. So take it away with the recommendations.
Well,
slide 11, por favor, Oscar.
Well, we need reforms in the law. We need reforms.
This is really the I guess the butter.
Yes, absolutely.
The important of this, the jelly, to top it all off. This is the important part.
You always want to talk about, if there's a problem, you want to talk about solutions. You want to talk about the many different things that need to come together to ensure that children are safe. We need reform in the laws with the 2018 legislation, but also the states can also do a little more as well in terms of ensuring that children are safe. The courts continue to play the role of that line of defense in terms of when they see something coming in, that a report is made to CPS. But what really I've been pushing for as well is an IG's office or an independent body that oversees CPS in the county.
Like the Inspector General, supposedly, for the United States.
Right. It's that same role.
Someone who's completely independent of...
Absolutely. And we saw the power in an IG. I mean, the IG investigated the President of the United States, right? So we need that here in terms of we need an independent body investigating and making sure that Child Protective Services is doing what they're supposed to do, and also that Child Protective Services gets the resources they need. I mean, it's so important that these men and women that are out there trying to help the children get what they need.
But this is probably going to be a huge problem now with COVID-19. I mean, I'm sure that a lot of this is where are we getting the money now?
Right, but that's why we can't forget, and that's why I was so grateful that you are addressing this issue on your show, because there's so many issues that are going to fall to the wayside. But we can't let this go, because what are we going to do without the protection of the children?
What recommendations would you have? I mean, obviously, if children, people who victimize children, my telling you on a television show that lasts an hour and change, don't do it. I don't expect that it's going to accomplish anything. What I'm hoping that this will what I'm hoping will be somewhat helpful is that viewers recognize that these increased limitations now are going to cause good parents to become stressed out.
Yes.
And these good parents who are now stressed out may cross a line.
Yes.
Because they get very pissed off, depressed, angry, leave me alone. They may just want to push a child out of the way, get out of my face. So for you, you're good people, try to keep in mind your own emotions and keep your emotions in check vis-a-vis your children. You need to keep your children in some way active so that they're not listening to the news all the time. Give them some homeschooling. Give them things to do so that you are a tighter, more cohesive family unit and you don't cross any sort of line. For those of you who are aware of or suspect or your child tells you something, given that you have almost no mandated reporters now, it's like it's going to be horrible. And to you, I just appeal, use your common sense, your good judgment, and kindness and compassion, and in some way reach out and say something.
Well, one thing people can do, like you just said, say something, is contact your legislator, contact your congressman.
Puedes sacar el 11.
Please.
Vamos a acabar con en un momentito con el 12.
Please, let's contact our elected officials. Like you had mentioned earlier, I was before the county legislature appealing to them to get an independent body, get an IG, something to investigate, to make sure that through those investigations there are recommendations for improvements. But each person, pick up the phone, write a letter, write an email to the legislator, write an email to the county executive, Steve Ballone, and push them to say, yes, let's get something in place. Let's get something in place. Let's be accountable. Let's help our children. Let's make sure they're safe.
With that appeal in mind, I would like to share that I and many of my peers from New York State Psychological Association, we did respond to the governor's request for volunteers. So I did sign up. I'm one of those 6,000 and change that signed up. There are many others. So I do applaud all of you who are trying to volunteer, and certainly my hat goes off to all the people that are out there, the caretakers, yes, the police, law enforcement, the postal workers, the firefighters.
To our military members, if you've received the email that I received asking that if you're willing to come out of retirement to help out, especially in the medical field, but they're also asking for other fields, because we have to remember that even those folks that are not in the medical field, they become sick. And there's holes there's holes now. So I did email back the Department of the Army and said I am available for service if they need me. I'm here. If they don't.
My wife, who for many years worked with AIDS patients, is perfectly willing to lend a helping hand also. So kudos to her, my Boricua wife, Irma. Let's look at some resources before we wrap up on slide 12. I did want to also leave you with a couple of sites that you can look at. Improving child welfare outcome. These are some very well-written, well-prepared. Some are a little bit maybe more professionally written and more complicated than others, but some are very good. That they're easy to read and easy to follow. So, improving child welfare outcome. This is through RAND, which is very well known in terms of their research. Child Welfare Information Gateway underneath that. Child Welfare Policy Primer. I've given you all of the websites there. As I've done before, I gave you the websites to the New York State Psychological Association. As I've mentioned before, I am a past president of New York State Psychological Association. Dr. Daniel Kaplan is the president this year, and he's doing a remarkable job under the circumstances of COVID-19. And the American Psychological Association, which is the parent organization, the umbrella, we are all under the APA. Again, for those of you in Florida or Texas or other states, you have your own professional associations. All you have to do is just go on the internet, look up California Psychological Association, New Jersey Psychological Association. Do you have a particular number or contact information that you would like to give the viewers if they want to get a hold of you?
Absolutely.
Puedes sacar el slide, Oscar. Ya estamos acabando.
Absolutely. My number is 631-358-8279. That's 631-358-8279.
So the third time's the charm.
631-358-8279.
¿Y en español?
631-358-8279.
Again, Jorge is an attorney. He has specialized in dealing with child welfare, and he's worked for the CPS at Suffolk County and had a very high-ranking position there for many, many, many years.
Legal Aid
So
Society, yes.
I do encourage you, if you have questions, you want to contact him, please, you know how to reach me. I'm on the internet. You should have access to my information by now. Again, I remind you, if you have any questions that you would like me to channel next week, April 2nd, on how you are faring emotionally, psychologically, behaviorally, as a result of the coronavirus, send it to Facebook, send it to Tribuna TV. They'll make it available to me, and we will show it with Oscar for next week. We'll actually have the slide. We'll actually have each question put up there. So without further ado, we're coming to an end. Oscar, te doy un virtual hug. So salúdale a la gente, al público.
No, bendiciones.
And Jorge, despídete.
I thank you, and I appreciate everyone doing their part.
I would give you a hug, but I can't. So it's
Absolutely.
it's a virtual hug and an at-distance handshake. Those of you who know me know that I've always been very, the huggy type of a person. So I have to keep that. Please stay safe. Please heed the precautions of your governors and reliable, sources of information. Limit the amount of intake. Watch your children. Please be careful to love one another. We will get over this. I really, really believe it. And I'm hoping that what emerges will be a better us down the road. We're going to have a couple of, bumps and bruises along the way, but we will fare. The sun will shine for all of us. So con eso me despido a todos. God bless all of you. God bless all of the helpers, and God bless everybody who's affected by the coronavirus. So, un abrazo.